howdy, listeners and watchers. It's me, Richard Horvitz, and I am Zim and Billy. That was crazy. I almost missed up Daggett and Billy. And you are watching Points of Experience.
I know people say don't meet your heroes, but I'm so glad I did, because Richard Horvitz is absolutely one of my heroes in terms of his work as not only a voice actor, but the comedy he brings to every single being he creates that lives inside of him and we get to graciously experience on our television screens or the internet screens, whatever the internet screens are, your desktop monitors, your phones. Helluva Boss is such an amazing show. We talk about, obviously, his desire to work on the stage, and you know he thought he'd be on Broadway. We touch on those things, and Helluva Boss is truly like this beautiful, funny musical that exists on YouTube, and the fact that we have creators making content like this for people to just enjoy for free is amazing. There's no gimmicks. If you want to support their Kickstarters, then amazing. If you want to buy their merchandise, amazing. But Richard's work as the voice director on the show, it is so phenomenal how good this show is. Obviously, the voice of Invader Zim, Angry Beavers, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Skylanders, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The list goes on, as they usually do with these people who are absolute juggernauts in this industry. And I couldn't have been lit up more like a Christmas tree when I got to talk with him. And we do disclaimer here, battle the elements, the element of internet. It is one of the it's not really written on the element chart. What is it, the periodic table? Is that where the elements are? That's not where wind and all that shit is, and fire, although I guess it kind of is. Yeah, but we go head on into battle, and it's a freaking strong dragon, that internet. So I hope this winds up being a cohesive thing that we can put out. And Richard is just such a kind, generous person with his experience as a teacher. There was moments where I'm just kind of like, that's it. That's the gospel. Write it down. It must be written somewhere in stone on slab. One of my favorite episodes by far. And watch the Invader Zim movie if you haven't. My gosh, like, it is so freaking good. It is by far, honestly, it is the best animated movie I've ever seen. It is the best animated movie I've ever seen. It has everything. Go watch it. It's on Netflix. If you have not seen that movie, I will rest my case there. And also review us on Apple Podcasts. That was my bad impression of a Zim laugh. But here we go. Richard Horvitz on the Points of Experience podcast. Yeah, internet is one of those crazy things, because I was actually recording from a hotel room the other day and the Wi-Fi was god-awful. I was doing a Source Connect connection. I'm like, there's no way that this is going to sustain. But somehow it did. So maybe there's maybe we were all being sold on a lie that we only need like 2 megs, but they keep up telling us.
They're trying to get you to pay the $19.99 for a day at the hotel. Yeah. For the high speed.
It's like, gosh, just can we all just have the same thing? Can't we just make it easy? It's like airplanes too, where you have to pay for like you pay more for airplane internet than you do for like the meals that you get on there. It's like $50. It's crazy.
Ridiculous.
So I don't know if you remember the interaction in which I kind of met you. It was, and I won't disclose anything for NDA reasons. But we were working on something, and you hopped into the Zoom, and I was like, "Oh gosh, that's Richard."
Yes, I remember that. I do remember it very clearly. That was a fun session too. So
yes, so
I'm excited about that project. I can't wait till it comes out.
Yes, me too. So for me, when that moment happened, because I've been such a fan of yours, I mean, we'll get into all the stuff that I've been a fan of yours of, but that was just kind of a crazy moment to me, and I was like, oh gosh, is he gonna sit here and listen to this, and now I'm worrying if I have to do a really, really good job or not. But
no.
Yeah, no, you were so nice and kind, and again, if that comes to life, that would be really, really, really exciting because that was so much fun.
Yeah, I would be excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, Richard, this show here, what we like to do is provide like a resource for people where they can learn, as well as get kind of a perspective from what you did in your life, how things went for you, and how you found yourself to where you are today. So I'd love to start a little bit at the beginning. I know you started acting from when you were younger, and you grew up in California. Can you kind of talk me through your youth growing up to that first moment where you're like, I'm gonna audition for, I believe it was Oliver? Is that what your first thing was?
Wow, you've done your research, Paul. Yeah,
you gotta.
So I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Van Nuys, California, and as I've said before, in the San Fernando Valley, we were like an original family. Like, people moved here in 1949, which is when our family moved here, in just 1950. And the valley was comprised of two types of families for the most part. Those in the aerospace industry, because you had ROCCAT at the west end of the West Valley, and you had Lockheed at the end of the East Valley. And then there was all the studio families, actors and, studio workers, and directors and writers and all that. And I was an aerospace family kid. My dad worked at Rocketdyne and worked on all the Apollo rockets and the space shuttle before he retired. So that was what I was. I was just a valley rat. And so when I was about 10 years old, there was a man by the name of Floyd Huddleston who had written the music for the Aristocats for Disney. And
my favorites.
He attended the church that my family grew up in, or I grew up in, and he wrote a Christmas show and asked if I would do it, and I was only like 10 at the time. And my parents said sure, and I did the play, and he liked me so much, he introduced me to his agent, and that's how I got my first agent at 10, and suddenly my mom was driving me to commercial auditions and television auditions on, the other side of the hill, as we used to say, because we were in the valley. And so that's how I started, and I started out as a hand model. I was like in all the toys for like Kenner Toys and different toy brands. If they did an extreme close-up of the kid playing with the toy, it was my hands, you would see.
Like George Costanza.
Like George Costanza, until I got, an iron on him. No!
Yeah.
Right? So, and then from there, I continued to do a lot of commercials for Freshen Up Bubblegum, Chevy Citation, a bunch of Rustler Steakhouse. And then when I was 13... I got an audition for and my first equity production musical. It was called Oliver, and it starred Shani Wallace, who had played Nancy in the 1968 Academy Award-winning musical. She played Nancy. She reprised the role. It was directed by Anna White, who had won the Oscar for choreographing the 1968 musical. And Dick Shawn was in it, and Stubby Kaye, and all these luminaries from the 1940s and 50s. And that's how, and then from there, I continued to do TV, mostly TV. I did all the sitcoms. I did, Different Strokes, Head of the Class, You Can't Take It With You, Rags to Riches, and a ton of shows. Then in the 1980s, I got my own series called Safe at Home for Ted Turner's Superstation, WTBS. And then in the 80s, I began my role, like I did a ton of teen films. Most notable was Summer School with Mark Harmon and Kirstie Alley, and directed by Carl Reiner. And then around 1989, I discovered Voiceover, and that was like a ugly duckling coming home to roost. And that's how I got into Voiceover.
My gosh, I mean, so much to. I know that was very quickly.
So much to unpack.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to even start. But did you have an inclination as a kid where you were like, was there a first moment you were like, I want to perform, or was it just the fact that somebody came to you and said, here's an opportunity?
No, I wanted to do it. I was a kid that was sat in front of a TV set from the time I can remember, and I was obsessed with shows. My favorite was Get Smart. Gilligan's Island, I Love Lucy, The Brady Bunch, The Partridge Family, all the things that, my contemporaries and I grew up watching back in the day when there was only 3 networks. And I was in love with shows like The Flip Wilson Show and Tom Jones, or my mom called it Tom Jones from England. And I was obsessed with like performing. I wanted to be a performer, and I loved it. And I discovered that I could make people laugh at a pretty young age. And so I always knew that's what I wanted to do. Even when I was in college, I was at UCLA as a theater arts major, but I was cast in that TV series. So I took a leave from theater arts thinking I would go back, but I never did because, my career just took off at that point.
Was that, getting that first opportunity, obviously the world of on camera and all that stuff is very different than the world of voiceover. It's a completely different beast in some regards, but a lot of the same principles apply. When you got that first sitcom, did you feel like that you had made what everybody assumes like making it is in this industry?
Yeah, you always think you've made it until the work runs out. I thought I made it when I got the series, because at the same time I got the series, I started doing the film work, and I did summer school in a movie called Thrashin' with Josh Brolin, another one called How I Got Into College with, surprisingly enough, though we never met at that time, Tom Kenny was in that same movie. And I always thought that I made it. I always thought that I would always be working. And it wasn't until the Writers Guild strike in 1989, 88, 89, when my career just like my on-camera career just went, like took a nosedive. And it was a friend of mine named Michael Cutt, who I was doing that series with, that said, have you ever thought about getting into voiceover? And I knew nothing about voiceover. It just so happened that my commercial agent, my on-camera commercial agent, shared an office with a voiceover agent at the time named Sandy Schnarr. And I walked over and said, hey, how do I get into voiceover? And she goes, well, you have to do a demo reel. And back then it was a reel-to-reel. It was,
Yeah.
And I did. And my first month with her, I booked 3 commercials, radio commercials. And I thought, I've got it made now. I can do these all day long. I'm set. I don't have to worry about money ever again. And that's the last time I worked that year in voiceover. It took me 5 years to break into animation. 5 years.
Wow. I resonate with that so much because I was living in New York. I was doing I was doing theater and TV and film and all that stuff. And I finally booked a gig doing the promos for Nick Sports. So I was like, yes, I've made it. I'm going in to record multiple times a week. This is going to be easy. Who said ramen noodles was something you had to live on? And then the entire Nick Sports division closed. They were just not making stuff anymore, and I was just kind of eagerly well, you guys are just gonna move me over to the main Nickelodeon stuff, right? And they're like, well, no, we have that guy already in the group of people. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do?
Yeah, because it's a little deceptive in the Nick New York world, because even though the headquarters is in New York, most of their VO and all their animation, for the most part, with the exception of Blue's Clues at the time and all those, were all being done in LA.
Yeah.
And when Nickelodeon opened up their studio, they had already been doing tons of shows, but just using different, satellite animation houses to do it. And it wasn't until they opened the studio, it had to have been around 1996, I'm thinking, around there. 96 is when they opened it. Yeah, I was there for the opening.
Wow.
They had me and Nick Bakay pretending to record the Angry Beavers for everyone taking a tour of the newly opened studio.
They just put you in the booth and they were just act like you're doing a scene,
headphones.
Or do they?
Yeah, it's Doug, Squiddy Beaver, Norbert, It's just...
Hey, but you know what?
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, but I'm sure those people appreciate it. I'm sure it was a very fun moment for that. And you don't really, you don't really see much of that anymore to a degree. Especially now with the pandemic. It's not a lot of people going into studios, and there's kind of that engagement between the performer and the audiences. Sometimes you got people on Warner Brothers lot. You see the actors walking around, but
very much so. It's not that anymore, and especially, you're right, since the pandemic, I can't remember the last time I was actually in the studio with cast members recording. And even prior to the pandemic, there with the advent of streaming and all sorts of outlets to do animation, all of our schedules rarely, lined up at the same time so that we could all come in. Now, for Nickelodeon, we were able, with our majority of our cast for the episode, for Loud House, we were able to come in and do a giant radio record, we call it, where we all get to play off each other. So it's like doing a play every week. But since then, we have done Loud House from our studios, and we're all together in our booths, so that works. That's kind of neat. But it's just not the same as being in the sessions together, you know?
Yeah, I had the very fortunate opportunity of working in New York and doing, like, prelay as you're talking about, where you're recording the characters before they animated or whatever, and I remember even just like you forge relationships in the breaks, kind of, and that's the element I feel like that's removed, is where you're talking with your other actors on that 5-10 minutes 15 minutes, and to me I feel so robbed of that. I moved to LA right before the pandemic happened, and I was like, what happened?
Well, I think the thing that I don't care for, and I know a lot of my friends love it, I don't. I don't like self-record on-camera stuff. Home record, that's just been going on since, you know, people started having home booths. But shooting self-records at home on your backdrop with the lighting and all that, I don't enjoy it, because I'm better in the moment when I'm in the room with the casting people or the director, the producer. That same thing applies to recording with the radio recorder, the prelay, as you said it. You all up your game because you're playing with your friends on the playground, you know? It's like getting to see people in auditions. You used to see your friends that you would be reading with or against, and it was just a great time. Now we're all kind of isolated, and the one thing I don't particularly miss is the traffic, driving to the sessions. But I've gone back to the studio as of late a couple of times, not for Nick, but for a lot of the video games. I'm going into the studio again.
Yeah, that's the other element too, just like in the waiting room. But even in that process, I felt like for me, especially in New York City, the traveling and being on the subway and stuff, I was participating in like society, and I'm absorbing characters as I go by, and I'm seeing things in that's the thing for me too, where now we're just kind of stuck in our rooms, and it's kind of like, all right, what are you watching on TV? What are your neighbors like? Like, what are we really learning from? It's a very interesting experience, and I kind of actually want to step back and talk about that 5-year period before you broke into animation, or you had that first opportunity. What do you think either changed, or what was that opportunity for you where you're like, okay, I finally have broken through this door, and now I'm able to do this?
Yeah, it's a good question, Paul. To answer, I guess I'd have to say I was really naive when it came to voiceover. I didn't know anything at all about voiceover. I was always an on-camera or stage actor, and I didn't realize how many people were doing it, or how you even break into it, or anything like that. And I remember those first 3 commercials that I got that I was telling you about. They were radio spots, and at the time, you made like $175 per spot per cycle. So you made $175 for 13 weeks plus 10% for your agent. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking to myself, this is how naive it was. Wow, if I do 5 of these a day, 5 days a week, I'll be clearing $5,000 easily a week. You know, I can live on that.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's the last time I worked that year in voiceover. But when it came to animation, I was just, I wasn't known as an animated actor because I didn't have a demo. In fact, but the first animation demo I ever had was after I had like 3 series under my belt. And I only made one because I thought I needed one, but I didn't at that point, but I didn't even, that's how naive I was. But what finally broke it open was there was a show called The Legend of Prince Valiant, or The Adventures of Prince Valiant, something to that effect. It was with Robbie Benson, and Rob Paulson was on it. Like, everybody and their brother had been on this show. Because it was one of those ones that everyone made their way to the show at some point. And it was my very first animation thing. And the director was this director who's since passed away by the name of Stu Rosen. And I'll never forget, I walked in there, and there was like Charlie Adler was on a mic, and I can't remember who the other ones, but it was like very big VO people names that I wasn't even really familiar with at the time. Yeah. And I remember they were all like around the microphone, standing up, like they're like, I'm thinking, well, that's weird. Why don't you just sit down? You're on the microphone, right? From that day forward, I never sat down again because I got it. Your energy comes from the bottom up, and you're playing at the mics. But what I remember is I did my very first line, and I was just like a ship's mate number 2. And my only line was like, "We've swabbed, aye, Captain, the decks have been swabbed," or something like that. And I do the first line, and I remember everyone laughing. I'm like, oh, I'm good at this, right? I'm really good at this. And Stu Rosen came over the talkback and said, "I didn't realize we hired Woody Allen to play a pirate." And I was pretty mortified. I was humiliated, but I remember thinking that day, okay, now I'm an I'll show you kind of person.
Yeah.
And from that day, I made my goal to be an animation person, and that's just where and on camera, my voice was often a hindrance.
Yeah.
They would often say he doesn't sound like he looks. Mm-hmm. He doesn't sound like he looks. And so, for a long time, I practiced talking like this and taking voice lessons and talking basically like, Billy's dad.
Yeah.
But it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And I remember it was my mom who said to me, you should look at your voice as a positive, not a negative. And at the same time, my friend Michael Cutt said, "Hey, you should get into animation." And so that's where I went, and just kind of went where it took me.
Yeah.
And I finally got my job on that show, and then shortly thereafter, I was cast in The Angry Beavers.
Wow. It's such a very similar kind of scenario for me, obviously, because I came from an on-camera background, and I had many moments because I don't want to say how old I am. I'll tell you off camera. But at the, for my age,
you're probably old enough to be my son. So
well,
I'll say that.
Well, listen. Everyone thinks I'm over 18, so that's where I'd like to keep it.
Yes.
So even when I was in New York, a lot of times everyone thought I was like 14. And I'm also very short as well. So on camera wise, you're 5'4", and you have a high pitched voice all the time. I'm calling Amazon. They're saying, "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't have this."
Yes.
I had those similar feelings where I constantly was trying to make my voice sound deeper. I always was trying to find shoes that would make me look taller, be something that I wasn't. And then when you finally find animation or commercials even, you can just be who you are. And it's interesting, compelling, and it's rewarded to a degree.
It's funny you talk about commercials because, little known fact, I was the green grapes in the Fruit of the Loom commercials for about 3 or 4 years. And I remember my friend was the red apple. Uh-huh. He played Apple. And he was already on it, and they were recasting the green grapes. And he told me, he goes, just so you know, they're concerned mostly about your voice, so you want to keep it down. So even in commercials, you rarely heard me speak on those things because it just is. I always feel like the woman in Singing in the Rain. "You can't talk like that to me," and it's how I always feel. But I get that. I get that that thing about ma'am, because I get that all the time. Like when my kids were little and we'd go through the drive-through, it would be like, I'd like a cheeseburger, French fries, and a Coke. And my kids would always say, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "You'll hear in a minute." And they go, "Would you like to supersize that, ma'am?" And I would say, "This is a sir." "Oh, I'm sorry," so.
That's I had the same, because when you want to be taken serious, whenever I'd have to complain to customer service, I'd always do the, and I would always, and especially sounding this way, I'd always say, if my fiance, I would always be like, "Yeah, my wife, she told me, there's this problem going on," because no one's going to take you serious when you say my girlfriend said that this package didn't arrive and I need to figure out why. They're like, "All right, kid, piss off." So
Exactly.
I resonate with that so much, and it was very freeing to get into voiceover and cartoons and animation. Did you watch a lot of cartoons and voiceover or anything did you play video games, or was it just kind of you fell into it?
Video games were long before my generation, but I grew up watching Speed Racer, and I love Speed Racer. It's one of my all-time favorite shows, and I always turned every toy I had into the Mach 5. But as far as animation and actors in animation, I knew Mel Blanc like everyone, June Foray, I knew the names. But like the everyone, I didn't know them until I worked with them, because it was literally just another facet that I was unaware of. Like, Starkist Charlie Tuna I knew, growing up.
Did you have on-camera actors, or were there people you aspired to be like, or shows that you wanted to be on? Obviously, you were watching sitcoms, you said, but were there actors who you were like, I want to do what that person's doing?
Well, the joy of my career has been that for the most part, every actor that I grew up watching on TV, I got to either meet or work with. So, I got to play Gilligan to Alan Hale Jr.'s Skipper in my series. Dave Madden, Reuben Kincaid, he and I were on the Munsters Today together. When I was doing Oliver, Gene Kelly and Olivia Newton-John were rehearsing Xanadu, the roller skating number. So I got to meet Gene Kelly. And the irony of that is that Gene Kelly's nephew, Mike Kelly, was the stage manager on Safe at Home, my series, just coincidentally, and he would always refer to him as Uncle Gene. But David Carradine was a dear friend of mine. I could go on and on. A lot of the Brady kids I worked with, a lot of the, I guess I always was more of a fan of I was always a huge, the Marx Brothers are my favorite. I loved all the Warner Brothers early stuff. I loved James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart. I think those were two of my favorite. And I don't think it escaped me that Jimmy Cagney was only about 5'6", but everyone thought he was such a tough guy. I think I really aspired to that, because when you're short, like I am, you said 5'4", I'm 5'6". Yeah. But now I'm probably 5'5" after shrinking.
Yeah. I say I'm 5'5", and it says that on my license too, so I'll take that where I can get it.
But yeah, so I think that if anything, I aspired to be, I was one of 6 kids, and I was the last of 6 kids, and so my dad was born in 1921, and my mom was born in 1923. So I mean, that's what I was around. I was around, movie stars in the 1940s were their idols, and music. I grew up with my sister and my sister's records, so I grew up with Elvis Presley records, and Bill Haley and the Comets records, and Herman's Hermits and all those things. So that's still where my taste lies, even though I was the last of 6, and the span and age was my older sister and myself. The bookends is 23 years.
Wow.
So and same parents, and my parents were married for 76 years before they passed away.
Wow, that's a beautiful marriage right there. My gosh,
yeah.
And that's for you talk about all these inspirations and stuff and the things that you're brought up on. Because I asked because you are one of what I would consider in these animated series that you've worked on. You talk about the Angry Beavers, we talk about Invader Zim, Billy and Mandy. You have been somebody who I've looked towards, and I know many other have. I look at you as one of the comedic geniuses who work in the animation field, and I truly feel that way. It's been every time, and we'll talk about these in a second, but did you in UCLA, or at some point were you doing improv with friends? I know you eventually went on to have a sketch group and stuff. Where were you harnessing that comedy bone that you had? Did you do stand-up? Where did it come from?
I just always had, a pretty fast wit, I think, we talk about size and everything. And so I think that I developed a sense of humor very young as a defense mechanism. Same. I wasn't as big as, a lot of my friends, and I wasn't as big as a lot of bullies. So you hear a lot of times, you'll hear Chris Rock and people talking about having to cut people to the quick with wit or insults and stuff. So that's really where I kind of honed my, there's always an edge to my humor too. It's always an edge. There's always there's an edge to most comedians. So I just was always drawn to improv. I was always a great improviser, not to brag, but if you listen to a lot of the Angry Beavers stuff, we improvise up a storm. Billy and Mandy, we improvise up a storm. A lot of the stuff in Zim, I improvise stuff, and certainly Billy and Mandy. Yeah. Billy and Mandy had a lot of improv. But I just was always drawn to comedy. I think my timing was born out of sitcom, and I mentioned it before, but Don Adams from Get Smart was a hero to me. Mm-hmm. And so if you listen to early Daggett on the Angry Beavers, he's a cross between Don Adams and Lou Costello. which is like, you listen to me, Norbert. We just left home, right? Sorry about that, Norbert. You know, there's a lot of Don Adams in there. But I found out that I thought to myself, you know, Lou Costello sounds very much like Time Daly from Cagney and Lacey, which sounds just like Nathan Lane. So those three are all the same to me, you know?
Well, that's such a interesting thing. So many actors talk about the idea of mixing either personalities or voice prints or the inclinations that certain other celebrities have, people with unique qualities, and that's how you can find a character. Even a bad impression is a good original character.
Absolutely.
When you had that first Nickelodeon kind of, you know, with Angry Beavers, were you cognizant and recognizing these type of things to do that? Or like how much of it was written on the page? How much was it like in the callbacks, you finding that moment? Like what was it from first audition to you being in the recording studio, you know, doing the job?
That's a good question, Paul. I knew that I like to play and play pretend fully, which is the complete definition of our job is to play pretend and play pretend fully. Most of us spend more time auditioning than we do getting to do what it is we say we do. So it feels like our job most of the time is to book the job. That's what we prepare for. But I don't prepare that way. I prepare just based on the story. And my barometer is always, did I have fun? I know I'm not going to book everything, but if I'm having fun, I know you're having fun. And, you know, I'm a true improviser, meaning there's people that say they improvise, but really they're just rewriting on their audition. Oh, I'm going to say this here. I'm going to say this here. I don't. It just comes out of the moment that I'm playing in. So I approached animation the same way I approached, you know, stage, because that's truly my real passion is stage. It still is. I always thought I would, you know, I'd be on Broadway one day because that was always my aspiration. The funny thing is that I'm now doing a show called Helluva Boss, where there's like it's all Broadway stars, and I get to sing on the show. And there's another. I'm also voice directing that, and I'm voice directing another one for Vivian for Vivzy Pop called Has-Been Hotel, where there's lots of music and lots of very big Broadway stars, and I get to sing with them. So I kind of got what I wanted. So from that moment, from the audition process, the Angry Beavers was an interesting one. I went in there and played the way I would play on any kind of opportunity, you know, on camera or otherwise. And then I didn't realize that when I came in, I would be replacing another actor that they had already recorded. So when I went in there, I actually dubbed over the original actor. And then I didn't hear anything. And then a year later, my agent says, "Oh, I have an audition for you for the Angry Beavers." I said, "But I was already that kid." So this went on for like 3 years. That's the thing about animation, is that I call it planting seeds and, you know, harvesting 2 years later, because that's usually how long it takes. So I found out as I went through the audition process all over again, is that they were always going to keep me. They just didn't want it. They didn't want the other Norbert that they had to feel bad that they were only replacing him. So that's how I ended up working with Nick Bakay.
Wow. Fascinating. And this is kind of a good segue for us. I mean, you talk about coming in and replacing another character. I obviously, you know, with Zim, you kind of had a very similar situation going on where you, from what I have learned, it's Mark Hamill was originating in that role. And then, you know, you moved to Billy West and then comes you. That whole idea of when that opportunity is presented to you, do you find that like, oh my gosh, I have these shoes to fill, and then it's compounded again?
No, because this is like an often misunderstood story, because I've told this story many times, but I'll tell it again.
I'm complaining to Wikipedia. That's it.
No, well, that's the problem. The problem. There's no problem. The issue is this: Jonan wanted me as Invader Zim. So originally they had gone to Mark Hamill, and Mark was already doing the Joker, and it was very big with Jonan that he didn't want voices that people put on voices.
Yes.
And so Jonan met me, and he knew me from my work in Power Rangers. And he said, I want you to read for Zim. I want you to read for Invader Zim for the show. And when I went in, I thought I was more right for Dib, because I thought that's what I was going to read for the Dib part.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I want you for Zim. So I did my Zim, and he was like, yeah, that's it. I want you for Zim. And this was before Billy, and this was before, maybe Mark had been considered, but it was definitely in the early stages. I was Jonah's choice. But the executive producer at the time knew that I was already doing Angry Beavers, and they didn't want me on another show at the same time I was doing this show. And so she passed on me, and Jonan had to go along with it. But then Angry Beavers ended just before they had delivered the pilot. And Jonah goes, wait a minute, you're not doing Angry Beavers now. You can do Zim. Come into the booth. And literally that day I went to the booth and I dubbed over like 70% of Billy's thing, his voice. But here's the iron. This is like this is the part that no one realizes. They always, like, even Nickelodeon will advertise the never before air pilot of Invader Zim starring Billy West. But if you listen to it, it'll start out my voice and finish Billy's voice, or Billy will start a line, it'll finish me. It'll be my laugh or his laugh, and at times it's both of us at the same time.
I remember listening to that.
Yeah, I don't get credit because I dubbed it, and I just dubbed it at that moment. So, but that's what they delivered. That's what they delivered in New York, and they said, "Okay, hire Richard," and that's how I became Zim.
Well, I'm very glad to have gotten that correction, because it's very fascinating to hear this stuff, because it happens all the time in different capacities, and obviously the information that's on the internet is 90% of the time just fabricated or false. So I'm glad at least here for people to.
I found the internet to be true in every respect.
Yeah, right. It's true about all the wrong things, which is exactly what it is. But so it's very interesting, and this is Zim for me. This is where I truly felt. I mean, obviously I grew up. I grew up in the 90s, and all of those cartoons, every single one, I consumed everything from Cartoon Network to Nickelodeon. Hey Arnold, Rugrats, Angry Beavers, SpongeBob, Invader Zim, Ren and Stimpy, Wild Thornberrys,
Cat Dog. Yes.
Obviously Rocket Power had a huge influence on me, but those were the shows that I was watching every day. I was a latchkey kid sitting in front of the TV,
and
that's
the thing
what I was
that was amazing about Nickelodeon. No matter how good the show was, they just played it over and over again until it became so ingrained in your memory that you just started watching it, and that's what we just watched it like over and over again,
Which was so fascinating about Zim, too, because I didn't realize it was only one season, right? It was only one season?
Season and a half, 26 episodes,
Yeah. So that to me, because I watched so much of it, and I that's where I truly fell in love with you and this idea, because I was a kid that was like Zim. I had a penchant for being obnoxious and kind of trying to just have fun at every moment, and I was just, it was so different than anything else, too, because it was edgy and almost kind of dark, but not overly done. It didn't talk down to people. It found the true humor and comedy. It was such a brilliant show. It was almost ahead of its time in a way.
It was exceptionally ahead of its time. And it's funny. I have a friend, Dean Cameron, who played Chainsaw in the movie Summer School with me. And it's like most of my work is considered cult classic. But the joke is cult classic is just is a euphemism for commercially unsuccessful. Because Invader Zim it was not on the right network. That's what it was. It was not for the demographic that Nickelodeon was going for. I don't know what they expected when they hired a creator who was famous for Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, Squee, and I Feel Sick. But it was dark. Dark Harvest is a scary episode where Zim is collecting organs. And they do that thing on the roof where the tiles go. It's scary, and it would scare a young kid, But that said, it is the show that is the ugly stepchild of Nickelodeon. That no matter how far they tried to bury it, it's still it succeeded in on its own, and I think that's a testament to Jonan, who really had a vision, and it was his vision. I mean, he really is the commander of that. It's everything in that is Jonan. Yes, we bring things to it, and Jonan will tell you that He and I are a great collaborator. We're collaborators because I'm not what he had thought of when he thought of Zim, but what I brought to it, he goes, oh yeah, I like that. And that's how that came to be, which is a credit to Jonan that he's not so married to his vision that he doesn't take in other people's. I've been very fortunate with creators that know that I like to improvise and add to it. Angry Beavers is a perfect example of something that was ahead of its time because we were the first show where we were actually allowed to overlap each other as the other one was doing their lines, because Mitch Shower said, I want this to feel like brothers fighting, and that's how brothers fight. They interrupt each other, and that's what Angry Beavers was, and that was ahead of its time also. Although Angry Beavers, that people don't realize, we did 103 episodes of Angry Beavers. I mean, we were on a long time, so it just kind of disappeared, though. It just it disappears. It's not aired anymore, except for maybe on Paramount. I think Zim is also on Paramount. It used to be on Hulu. I'm not sure where, but it's not like we don't get the love that a lot of the other 90s shows seem to get, especially Angry Beavers. Yeah, well,
I loved Angry Beavers so much. And again, it's like it's so hard for you to, because they replayed things so much back then. You just felt like you were constantly in that loop. And now, and again, it's like things almost ahead of their time at that point where Nickelodeon, I feel like they didn't really know what the vision for that studio or for the network was going to be. And then they wound up with these shows, even like Real Monsters, like, these shows that were like, you're like, wait a second. I mean, and Ren and Stimpy, things like that.
Yeah, Ren and Stimpy, Real Monsters. Well, I love Doug when they finally got Doug over there. Yes. Doug, I think, was originally Disney, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, yeah.
I think it was, yeah. But also Rocco's Modern Life. It's a great show. Great show. I mean, that's where I came up. I remember we were invited to a lunch that Nickelodeon threw with Nickelodeon's new voiceover stars. And it was a lunch with me and Tom Kenny and Carlos Alazraqui. And it was, we were interviewed. It was like a press junket. And I thought to myself, wow, here we are, 35 years later, we're still going at it there and still doing our thing. So it's been fun. The thing about a career is that you don't know what you're doing as time goes on. Mm-hmm. You really just keep on keeping on, and then suddenly you become, icon, voiceover legend, voiceover icon. But you don't set out to be iconic. Yeah. You don't set out to be legend. You just set out to survive and not go the way of a lot of actors, right?
Yeah.
But it's like one of my favorite lines is in No Way Home. I think it was a documentary with Bob Dylan, and they cut to Bob Dylan and just staring at the camera, blinking, and he goes, "I didn't set out to be no voice of a generation. I just wrote and sang songs." And I get that. I don't think he did. I don't think there was that kind of forethought. You're just, I'm very lucky that I feel like I was the peak of my creativity in the 90s and early 2000s with the teams that I was teamed up with the crew and the cast and the writers of Zim and Billy and Mandy and Angry Beavers. We were all just having fun and playing. And, you're in a dark booth. You don't know how it's reaching out to the world. You don't know who's seeing it and what it means to people. And that's why I love conventions. That's why I go to conventions a lot, because you get to actually see and meet the people who were inspired by your work, and that's always really touching.
Well, I also have to say, too, at that time when there was only so many networks back then, right now we have, there's a billion streamers, there's so much content
way too many
being made.
Way too much content.
And
way too much content.
So it has two effects, I believe. Number one, I believe it made probably what you were going through coming into the industry at that time way more competitive, because there was, so far fewer opportunities. But also as a result of that, I feel like there was almost like an ability for those things to be nurtured into okay, we care about what we're making right now. Let's make it good and let's spend time on things, whether that's rehearsals or budgets. Right now, I feel like with a lot of things, there's so much and there's such a race to having the most content or making sure things get out on time. A lot of corners get cut.
Well, Yeah, well, everything is a streaming service now. Everything's a streaming service. Like Peacock is NBC's and Comedy Central. Everyone has streaming for their content. And I think that, to be honest with you, not to sound like the old curmudgeon or the old guy on the block, I think that the inundation of so much stimulation is what has contributed to dividing the country as a whole. Not on a political sense necessarily, but yes, on a political sense. But like when I was growing up, there were 3 networks, and we knew that we were all watching the same shows at the same time.
Yeah.
So when they talk about the golden age of television, it was a collective experience. But now someone is like, well, wait a minute. I'll give you another example. Growing up, we grew up with the Brady kids. We couldn't wait till next season to see how they had changed and how the show had changed. But now you binge an entire season in a sitting, like Cobra Kai. I love it. I binged the whole thing in one sitting. But now you don't have that same collective experience as growing up with them. Yeah. And I don't think that the kids growing up today are going to have the same, like they won't even remember. Like I can't even remember what shows I've watched with the streaming stuff. Yeah. Also, it drives me nuts. Like, if you work for, like, I did a Netflix series. I did Skylanders Academy for Netflix. And you basically only get 3 seasons. And the reason why you get 3 seasons, and a show will go on beyond that if you're lucky, the reason you only get 3 seasons is because they discovered that if a person hasn't watched your show and they're going to binge it to catch up, they will not do more than 3 seasons. Yeah. If I have to binge more than 3 seasons, I'm not going to watch your show. So that's why. And I just think there's just way too much. And the other thing is that like Netflix in particular, they won't advertise your show individually. Yep. They won't advertise it. They'll advertise their network and put pictures of your shows on it. But that it's up to you to promote your own show. And so hence, you know, now we're in the social media cycle. And that's why influencers are getting, you know, parts on, you know, Ozark. Yeah. Or they're getting parts on, you know, Better Call Saul because they're influencers and they have, you know, 13 million followers or something like that. That said, I'm very fortunate because I spoke about Vivian Medrano, who's Vivzy Pop. And Vivzy Pop on YouTube has a huge following. She has over 12 million subscribers. But she did it all herself. She formed her own company. She formed her own animation studio. She wrote and directed and animated with her own crew that she hired and paid for. And so now we get 70 million views on YouTube for Helluva Boss. We put out our new episode on Saturday for season 2. In 2 days, it had 6.7 million views. Wow. Network and cable aren't getting that kind of viewership. And I've been lucky because I've benefited from the fact that people like Vivian Medrano grew up watching my shows and were fans of Billy and Mandy and Invader Zim. Yeah. And so now I'm like the old guy that they can't wait to work with. And it's been one of the best things, kind of being brought into the influencer world and the social media stuff. And I don't have the patience to be posting something every single day. I just don't.
Do I see a Moxie behind you? Is that what I'm seeing in the corner over there?
You do. You see a Moxie, you see a Zim, you see a Billy.
Oh, amazing.
I think you see that.
You got the whole crew there. Yeah. Yes, I mean,
and there's Squirrel Boy too. Squirrel Boy is an oft-forgotten show that I did.
No, heck yes. I mean, I wanted to jump back into quickly because you were talking about Helluva Boss. It's I truly feel like you having come from that part where you're talking about the golden age of television, but then to kind of be transported into this truly what is becoming, I think, the golden age of video content today, which is YouTube, where you're able to take control again, where, traditionally the powers would be towards these networks, but we're seeing kind of like for one of the only great pieces of content that's made in such a unique way and produced to the same quality that these network shows are, but it's on YouTube and it's all for the creators.
And it's amazing. There's a lot of crowdfunding that goes on that's amazing. Vivian sells a lot of merchandise on shark robots, so you can sell pins and hoodies and all sorts of things. So she's got it all covered. She's got merchandising and creative control. But yeah, what I was saying was that I'm fortunate that people like Vivian Medrano grew up watching my shows and wanted to work with me. And so now I'm forging the new frontier of YouTube and social media, etc.
That's what I'm most excited about, I think, more so than like what we were saying. I mean, the streamers are great. There's great opportunities for people like me to, when I'm making my way now. But I feel like, it's more of a game of darts rather than a game where you're excited by the people surrounding a project. You feel like everybody is invested the same way, and it's not people have one foot in and one foot out.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of. I think you just said the first episode of the second season just dropped a few days ago, so I gotta check that out. I was one of those.
Really good. It's really good.
I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, we get a lot of backstory right off the bat in the first episode of season 2, which is really worth it because the writers have grown, the animators have grown, the actors have grown. I mean, it's we really kind of were finding it in the first season, and some of those episodes were just amazing, especially the music and the singing and the songs, which is my favorite part of it. And like I said, Vivian asked me to voice direct. So I love that aspect of it. Voice directing I really enjoy voice directing a lot.
So voice directing, this also kind of goes in part with the fact that I was a big fan of Crispin Freeman's, obviously. You had taught him, and I listened to your podcast with him when I was getting started in this industry, and a lot of what I learned was information that you were imparting in one way or another, either through him, kind of passing through the chain.
That's really funny because I coached Crispin, and if you heard the podcast that we did, which was I think it was like a 3-part episode, was because I was coaching people, and they would come and I would say something and go, oh, well, that's what Crispin says. Crispin says that exact same thing. So I called up Crispin and go, hey, you are telling them that I taught you that, right? He's like, yes. Yeah. And then that's how I ended up doing the podcast.
One of my favorite things that you guys talked about in that episode, I think, was, and it's something we forget so often, like, who the heck are you talking to? And it's like when you say, a lot of people are writing their own dialogue. They're not improvising. They're writing their own dialogue. These simple things that we forget, these nuggets of wisdom where, it's as simple as who is the person in the scene that you're talking to? Even if it's a commercial, you can't just talk to the the ether.
Especially in commercials, because it's never our job to sell in a commercial. Even if the only time it's really our job to sell is if it's a salesperson, and most of the time the salesperson is usually the foil of the story, and they're kind of comical, and so even they're not really trying to sell. But you always get the same direction in these commercials, looking for real, natural, conversational, no announcers, right? No loud announcers. And people ask me all the time, how do you do that? How do I do this real, natural, conversational? And I'll say, I don't know. But before you ask me that question, did you think to yourself, how do I make this question sound conversational? And the answer, of course, is no. And so, then it begs the question, in order to sound conversational, I have to know with whom I'm having a conversation with.
Yeah.
And there it is.
That stuck with me for a very, very long time. It's one of those things where even when you know it, you got to constantly remind yourself. It's easy to forget that easy piece of information.
Well, think about this. If we're other-oriented in the way we go about our work, meaning trying to please what I refer to as the theys, meaning the producers, the directors, to act the breakdown. First of all, it's presumptuous on our part to think that we are giving them what they are looking for. So that means, if you're familiar with SAG statistics, which means that a working actor only books 2 to 3% of everything that they read for. And that's batting really high averages if you're booking 2 to 3%. But that means that if you're other-oriented with the way you approach your auditions, that means that you're going into that booth by yourself with your copy in the dark and your Pro Tools open and your one little light, trying to impress people that you are never going to see, hear, meet, or know 97 to 98% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's no way to have an art form or a life of art to me.
I absolutely concur and agree, and I think, back to what I was saying, where I think when there was less studios and stuff, it was a lot, it was competitive, but now there's just so much noise. So I think regardless if you are extremely talented, you have to find a way to cut through all the noise and be kind of exceptional in being who you are. And you can only really achieve that by being yourself and offering what is unique to you to the table, because everybody else has done everything already. I feel like you gotta...
Well, the way I look at it is this. If I'll show you something. If you told a little kid that this stone was a birthday cake, the first thing a little kid would say is, can it be my birthday? Can we sing happy birthday to me? What flavor is it? How many candles? And an adult goes, okay. What can I do? What kind of training can I use to convey that I believe that this rock is a birthday cake? That's what we lose from childhood to adulthood. That's what we lose.
It's this, and we've heard it so many times here on this podcast, and you said it right as we started, the element of play, that kind of the filter that gets ingrained in us, this idea of these social perceptions and having to present yourself a certain way to somebody.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that the total definition of our job as an actor is to play pretend and play pretend fully. That's the total definition of our job. Yet, if you have this middle-class mentality, it's very hard for an actor to own that they are an actor if they cannot point to something that they have been in, something that they are currently working on, or something they've been paid to do. Why? Because of the family holidays. Weird Uncle Bob comes up to you and says, so, Paul, what are you doing these days to support yourself? Paul says, well, I'm an actor, Weird Uncle Bob. You're an actor? What does that mean? You just screw around all day? I know. What are you doing to make money?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you imagine if you had said to Weird Uncle Bob, oh, my job, Weird Uncle Bob? My job is to play pretend and play pretend fully. Uncle Bob would say, like, what? Hey, Sue, your nephew plays pretend fully for a living. He must be hanging around with too many of them West Coast snowflake liberals again. And yet, if you heard Meryl Streep in an interview, and the interviewer said, so Meryl, what is your job? And Meryl said, oh, my job is to play pretend and play pretend fully. We'd all go, oh my God, yes, she's a god. It would become a meme. It would be on our coffee cups and our t-shirts and our vision boards and our desktops. And yet you can't point to one time, from the time Meryl Streep went into Yale to the time she got out, from Kramer versus Kramer to Sophie's Choice of The Devil Wears Prada, that she was not just going from story to story playing pretend. You don't see her in scandal rags. You don't see her in all the magazines and stuff. And yet we place the people that play pretend on pedestals. And that's what I like to aspire to.
Wow. It's, that disparity between valuing yourself as an actor and believing in yourself and what you do and having the confidence to and that's kind of like the mental gymnastics you have to kind of overcome to even just do the job, because the more you worry about, and I've had so many of those conversations with my grandma where she said, well, why don't you get on this show? I like this show. I'm like, I don't know. Let me just call up Dick Wolf and say, hey, Dick, I'm waiting for my shot. My grandma said, why aren't I on Law? Whatever it might be. What do you believe is the thing that actors, humans, anybody can do to overcome this obstacle that many of us are faced with? What is the remedy? What is the solution? It's very simple. You make the story more important than yourself. Your job is not to drive the vehicle. Your job is to let the vehicle drive you. You're merely a vessel through which the words pass, but the words must be informed. You must know why you're saying what you're saying, and you must be thinking as the person in the story. But so much of us make ourselves more important than our stories. But if you're constantly asking questions
about your story and trying to find the answers, there's no room for the self-director to get in the head and start judging you and trying to direct you as you're playing. It's my mentor, Diana Castle, who I recommend everyone to, said to me one time, you know, the concerns you have in your secondary reality far outweigh the concerns of your primary reality. In your secondary reality, you can be a spy. You can be a ruler of worlds. You can be a god. You could be an international man of mystery. You can be an alien. In your primary reality, you're worried about not tripping on this word, doing a good job, being liked. Doesn't even compare. And so the answer to your question is you got to make your story more important than yourself. And that's what I pay homage to, the story, constantly.
Gosh, I mean, the mic drops right there, kind of. I don't know if I have to make another comment regarding that. It's just kind of like I'm ready to. That's what it is. I won't ruin it by talking with my nonsense. So, very, very well said, and thank you. And that's very important for our listeners to hear, because now more than ever, especially considering we're in this world of social media, it is perceived as the opposite. The person is more important than the story. Yeah. The image of the person is selling the story. Yeah. So it's very reassuring and comforting, and we need to hear more voices reminding us that the story is what is important. So I want to make sure I round things out here, and then we won't keep you forever here. But I definitely would love to talk about, especially someone who's worked on so many things in animation, video games, just like with Invader Zim, Psychonauts, these things that you've worked on, to see these things come back. What has that experience been like to get the email or the phone call? Have there always been whispers? Have you been anticipating or hoping that these things would come back? What is that whole experience working on something and then, sometimes a decade later being like, hey, remember that thing you worked on? We want to see it again.
I always kind of knew that Invader Zim would come back in one fashion or another. I still hold out the same hope for Angry Beavers, to be honest with you, because I could see that happening. But Invader Zim, it never surprised me. It was always a matter of when Jonan wanted to do it again, because he had many offers. It's more heartbreaking to me that it finally comes back and we bust our butts on it. And then it goes to Netflix, it airs, and Enter the Florpus was a brilliant movie. And that's it. Nothing comes of it. That's what it really is sad to me. Yeah. But Psychonauts. I'm just a huge fan of Psychonauts. And Tim Schafer is brilliant.
One last question here. We'll get to our audience question. We'll get you out of here. So, what about, is there a project that you've worked on that's, obviously we have these juggernauts that people know you for. Is there something that you're really proud of that people, like we were talking about Zim, that they, they don't see these things? What is the thing that isn't brought up all the time that you're like, I was really proud of that?
One that's not brought up that I was really proud of? Yeah, I like Squirrel Boy. Squirrel Boy was a good show. That didn't last long. I was proud of that one. Let's see. I think that's about it. No, I'm just proud of that one. That one didn't go very far, but I really like that one. I like the cast and the crew, and the creator Everett Peck, who created Duckman, just passed away last week. So I was pretty proud of that one. So that's kind of prevalent on my mind right now.
All right. Well, we got to get people. We're going to link that in the show notes.
Yes.
Squirrel Boy.
Squirrel Boy.
Yeah. And what about, a question we ask a lot of our guests here, obviously we've already learned so much through your life experiences, and you're a wonderful teacher. Aside from what we've talked about already, is there a experience you've had in your life that kind of had an impact on you, whether it was from another teacher or it was through your own life experiences, something, maybe being a father, something that really left an impact on you that
I think
you would love to pass that information on?
I think being a father is very impactful because you suddenly realize you're living for more than yourself at that point. You've got, these kids that are counting on you. So that was definitely impactful. In fact, I I was very good friends with a man named Louis Arquette, who was the father of all the Arquette kids, David Arquette and
David Arquette, yeah.
Patricia Arquette and Roseanne Arquette. And he was a dear friend of mine. And when my wife was pregnant with our first child, Louis Arquette, their father, came up to me and said, "Richard, I hear your wife is with child." I said, "Yes, and I'm really nervous." And Louis said to me, "Richard, I'm going to tell you, I had a lot of kids." I said, "Yes, I know, Louis." And he said, "And I found that with each one of them, with each boy child I had, my career had an amazing boost. And with each girl child I had, with each female child I had such growth in spirituality that it was amazing. It was a beautiful marriage." And true enough, with each child I had, I ended up having 3 boys, but with each male child, I got another show, and then I got another show with my next one, and another one. So I don't know if that's true, but I think I believed it enough to make it happen,
Well, if it ever dries up, now you just know you got to have another kid. That's got to be
right,
the way to...
It's really for me. But I will say this. My mentor, Diana Castle, which my acting teacher, she changed my life in the way I approach things and the way I look at the world. Not just my career, but the world in general, by what she taught me. So Diana Castle, she teaches something called theimaginedlife.com. And so I always promote her because she was very instrumental in my evolution.
I mean, you, first of all, thank you so much for being on here and just sharing everything that you have with us. I've been a big fan, and I think you're one of the best teachers out there in the business, making some of the best actors out there. Your voice direction is unparalleled in what you're doing right now on Helluva Boss. It is one of the most inspiring shows I've seen, and like you said, this is all truthful. And even with Zim, just to go back to there, the things that you were doing. I mean, even just seeing where the pilot was, and then to see everything that came after, to see the choices, everything from like the laugh to like moments where like it felt like Shakespearean almost, and to see like the twists and turns was so inspiring to just be like, I never was able to sit back and go, I know how this show is going to go.
Right.
I never really knew what to expect next. And as a kid, and as even looking back as an actor, seeing the Netflix series, you're constantly like, oh shit, where are they going next? What is the joke? What is the performance? It constantly was changing. So thank you for all of that. And I really, it's Keith, can we have our fan question in, please?
Yes.
If you don't mind.
Let's see, Keith.
Absolutely. You actually had a very good transition there. Speaking of Zim, this question's from Alex Innit. They're a tremendous fan of you, which I think everybody should be.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Is there a moment in Zim that surprised you with how zany it was? You talk about improv a lot. Was there a moment like they wrote something down and you were like, I have to say this?
Nothing surprised me, but there were, I did love things like Pastulio. Grr, why was there bacon in the soap? Is hysterical to me because it made me laugh while we were recording, because it's also one of the first moments where Grr actually stands up to Zim with, I made it myself, which is not even, it's like it isn't even an answer to why was there bacon in the soap. And Grr said, I made it myself. So that's why there was bacon in the soap. But I love that moment. I loved a lot of the moments in Enter the Florpus, especially because it was, kind of a new look for Zim too. The whole thing was kind of rounder. The edges were kind of gone in a lot of the characters, particularly in Dib. But when it's like, of course not, Kurt. Their stupid eyeballs can't handle all this. I love moments like that. That makes me laugh because that's right out of Jonan. That is a Jonan moment. So it's like, that's like Jonan coming through and I get to say it. So yeah, I think that's pretty much my answers. I like Grr, why was there bacon in the soap has always been one of my favorite moments.
I remember one of my favorite moments from that movie was just like right out the gate too. Guru goes, I ate a baby, and I'm just like, okay, now I know the rider on for. I'll never forget that line. It's just so.
Yeah, I love that. I ate a baby, and Zim says he did. He did.
It's so perfect.
It's
oh gosh,
great moment. Love Gurr. Ricky Simons is brilliant as Gurr.
Yeah, oh gosh, yeah, phenomenal. Well, Richard, thank you so much. I'm so
Thank
sorry
you
you had to
so
deal with the
much.
internet problems
I'm
you did.
sorry that you had to deal with the internet. This is like the mislaid plans of mice and men, That's exactly what today turned out to be. It was like, and anything and everything that can go wrong went wrong today. So, except for we got hopefully enough out of this that if you do need me to come back, I would be happy to do it when my internet is not just completely kaput.
We will have to have you back, that's for certain. But as you said, Murphy's Law. Is there anything quickly you'd like to plug? Obviously, Helluva Boss season 2, episode 1 came out. Anything else that people should be looking towards?
There's stuff coming out. I'm World of Warcraft, Hearthstone. I'm in those all the time. So just keep your ears open.
Heck yes. Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate you coming on here.
You bet.
We did it. Gosh, we truly went into battle with that of the internet. Gosh, don't fight the internet. You will never win. It is too powerful. That was so amazing. And Richard has been an idol of mine and someone I've looked up to in this industry for as long as I've been doing this. He is a master at his craft, a comedic genius, as I said earlier. And we didn't even get to talk about Grippin' Adventures of Billy and Mandy. I mean, just all of these unique, hysterical characters, all that have their own kind of little nugget in the comedy sphere. And there's just, again, his resume is so dang long, filled with amazing things. Skylanders, a great series. It's just World of Warcraft. He was in EverQuest, I remember. We talk about the Power Rangers. Like, there's just so much he's worked on. He's done so many. Ben 10. It's all going to come to me as I keep talking, so I'll stop here. But he is truly a pillar in the industry for, especially from the comedic standpoint. It's hard to hold. What do they say? Hold a glass? Hold a something? Hold whatever it is that people hold to somebody else. You can't hold it to Richard because he's just going to destroy it. I'm like when I got to work with him. Even though, again, you don't really work with people, but I got to meet him briefly. It was like, one of the only moments I had a real kind of shock to my system because he is just so good, and I could listen to him for hours talk about his process and the things that he truly puts into practice. Because I think, especially from a comedic standpoint, if you are not invested 1,000,000,000%, there's no way to kind of break new ground. Because you have to believe you are that character and have fun to the extreme more than anything else. Drama, you can always get away with just kind of saying the dialogue a lot of the times. Comedy, you need great writing, but it's a marriage of great writing and great acting. Because even if it's got amazing acting, without the right actor, it just doesn't work. And every time Richard shows up to bat, he swings a freaking home run. I'm mesmerized by his talent. I'm blessed that we got to sit here and talk with him today. I hope this all worked out in totality. Make sure you check out his Squirrel Boy. Make sure we check out Squirrel Boy. Check out Helluva Boss. And make sure you review us on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, everybody. Until next time.